Paul, thank you very much indeed for joining us and agreeing to do this presentation. You and I were introduced by a mutual friend a number of weeks ago. And as I explained to you when we met, I have been following you for a number of years, and you're one of 4 people that I think I've probably watched everything you've ever posted. I also love the work of Ben Pyle and David Turver and Bjorn Lomberg. And all of this started about probably 3 or 4 years ago, when sitting down with someone I've been very good friends with for 20 years, was telling me about how we had to stop burning fossil fuels and net zero was so important, and we had to eliminate carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and all the rest of it. And I was shocked, first of all, at his position, but I started off being shocked at one challenge that he pushed back at me when I said, well, I've read lots and lots of things from other people that suggest a different point of view to yours. And he started off with, David, the science is settled on this. And I said, surely that's an oxymoron, because science is never settled. But that phrase, the science is settled, started to appear in mainstream media and in lots of places. And I thought, hang on a minute, how can this be true if that's true? And that is, the truth contract is all about trying to find out what the truth is about things that are being disputed. And so in the same way that I felt I had a right to say, well, I think there are other points of view to yours that need to be taken on board before I can decide what I think the truth is. You and I chatted about 5 things that I had a problem with over the last few years, where I didn't feel I was being told the truth. And, you know, whether it's Ed Miliband or the government or the World Economic Forum or whatever, saying, look, here's the truth. And there were lots of clever people like you and Bjorn and David and Ben saying, well, here's the truth. It's like, but they can't both be true.
Correct.
So you very kindly agreed to do this talk, and you asked me to think about what the 5 truths were that I was questioning, that I was being told. And what we agreed was to look at these 5 questions. And the first one is, you know, is climate science actually a science? You know, is that true or false? The second is CO2 a problem? You know, because I've heard CO2 is a problem, yet to me, plants wouldn't grow and trees wouldn't grow and life wouldn't live on this planet if we didn't have CO2. So I want to understand if CO2 is a problem. We've also heard from the president of the United Nations that the world's now boiling and we've got extreme weather events all over the place. It's like, is that true? And obviously, when the Labour government were elected in July last year, one of their promises that green energy was going to be cheaper and reduce bills. We've already got the highest bills almost of anywhere in the world for energy. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that. And then lastly, we agreed, you know, this net zero target, you know, is it possible? Is it needed? Is it sensible? Is it achievable? So they were the 5 areas that we agreed we would dive into today. So is climate science a science? Is CO2 a problem? Is extreme weather increasing? Is green energy cheaper? And is net zero possible, desirable, or achievable? So are you happy to jump into the first of those 5 topics?
Well, we're going to jump in straight away, I think. So that's the first one. Can you see that on screen?
Yes, thank you.
Is climate science a science, true or false? Well, there are 3 checks in science. So this has got nothing to do with climate science in particular. It's to do with all science. Yeah?
Any science.
And so what is science? How does it work? What's the mechanism by which it works? So there are three things I want to make clear that apply to all science. And if they don't apply, it ain't a science, right? So the first one is called an appeal to authority. Now, I'm going to show you something at first. I'm going to play a short video with a great authority. He's a Nobel Prize winner, okay? And this is from a movie. So I'll just play them.
Is one of the most respected scientists in the world. In 2022, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics.
Yes, there is no connection whatsoever between CO2 and climate change. That's all a crock of crap, in my opinion.
Right, so there we are, a Nobel Prize winner in physics saying it's a crock of crap, are exact words, all this nonsense. And now I could turn around and say, well, look, I've got him, so I must be right. But I'd be wrong, because that's not science. That's just saying he knows more. That doesn't get you anywhere. If that was applied in science, you'd never get anywhere, because the only thing that matters in science is evidence. Now, if he produces work with evidence in, yeah, I can appeal to his work, but I'm not appealing to him. And it's known as an appeal to authority. So Carl Sagan is the one that really summed this up. And here's the quote. If we can't think for ourselves, if we're unwilling to question authority, then we're just putty in the hands of those in power. But if the citizens are educated, form their own opinions, and those in power work for us. In every country, we should be teaching our children the scientific method and the reasons for the Bill of Rights. With it comes a certain decency, humility, and community spirit. In the demon-haunted world that we inhabit by virtue of being human, this may be all that stands between us and enveloping darkness. Okay, so there we are. That is what appeals to authority. It doesn't work. It's got no place in science whatsoever. And I could sum it up with this. An appeal to authority is where someone puts forward an argument that invokes some entity's conclusion, relying on its authoritative position or status to support it, rather than providing your own reasoning or evidence. So science is all about evidence. So appeals to authority have no place in science. Now, actually, before I go on with that, I will...
Can I just quickly ask a question?
Yeah.
What I understand from what you've just said is anybody's entitled to an opinion.
Correct.
But unless that opinion is backed up with some concrete evidence, it's just an opinion.
Correct.
And science is not based on opinions, it's based on evidence.
Yes. Now, I'll give you some examples of failures of appeal to authority. Now, if I told you that a clerk in an office, just working in an office, an ordinary clerk, not the boss, working at his desk with paper and that, he comes up with a theory, yeah, in something, and all the world's experts, all the world's professors on him laugh at him. Yes? They even sign 100-strong petition saying he's wrong and publish it in the newspapers to ridicule him. Yes? So if you were going on an appeal to authority, who'd be right? It would be the 100, well, it'd be everyone in the world. It would be all those people in the world. There were scientists in this case. And of course, they were wrong because the man's name is Einstein.
I think I've heard this story before.
He was a clerk in the patent office. So that's a perfect example. But let me bring you right up to date with appeal to authority. And it's this, the James Webb Telescope. Now, cosmology was pretty well settled. You know, nothing can be settled, actually, but we thought it was settled. So everyone understood how the galaxies formed in the cosmology sort of model. And we put the James Webb Telescope up, looked back further in time, and wow, the whole cosmology is wrong. So a reporter goes to a professor in Durham University who happened to have a big cosmology computer, apparently the biggest in the world, I understand. And they said, you must be devastated, all your life's work, everything gone. And he, you know, he's a pretty old professor. He said, oh no, I'm really excited. How exciting is this? That's a scientist. So again, just recently we've had the appeal to authority blown apart. So all science is understanding and trying to understand how the world works. Yeah. And there are certain rules you have to apply. So let's go on to the next rule. Okay. Unless you've got more. Yeah. So on the next rule is consensus. Now we all know about this. This is where they say, as your friend said, the matter's settled. Yes. It ain't settled. So let's look at consensus. Now, consensus, and this is by Michael Crichton in 2003, good quote. Consensus, historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It's a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you heard, hey, the consensus of scientists agree on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're being had. The work of science has nothing whatsoever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Yeah? And that is so true. So let me give you, any question at that point?
I was just thinking how it's very difficult for most adults to change a belief.
Yes.
And if we've been told at school, at college, at university, through the media, by the government
For decades.
for decades that CO2 is harmful or whatever it is, then you could understand how the average person would end up assuming that was the case because everybody had been told it and thought it and talked about it.
Yes.
And I can understand how someone turning up and saying, well, actually, that's not true, like Einstein in your example did, they would be ridiculed because actually people don't like change.
No, they don't. It's harder to change someone than to get them to believe in it in the first place, actually.
Yes.
So that is simply the case. And you've got Obama standing up saying it's all settled. You know, the president of the USA, it's all settled. Blah blah blah. You've got everyone. You've even today I've found a school book for 6-year-olds that's all about the doom to come and how all the CO2 is killing everyone. Yes, for 6-year-olds, right? So that's how deep it is in our education system. But I'll be summing this up.
All right. Sorry.
Okay. Now you got a question? No?
No, carry on.
Okay. So the examples I've got here, the clock. Now witches, there was a consensus 200 or 300 years ago that witches were, and don't forget there were master's degrees and PhDs in universities on witchcraft. And the consensus one that was there were witches and they burnt them. Yeah. And there's no such, let's look at a bang up to date example. Here we are. You've all heard about the 97% of scientists agree. Yeah. Right. And the scientific consensus that human activity is very likely causing most of the current global warming. And that's from Cook in 2013. That's what Obama repeated, and it went worldwide. The consensus. You'll hear it on television all the time. How dare you go against it? 97 or 99%. But when you look at that survey, which was done by, not by a scientist, it was done by a bloke who, does PR and things. Of the 11,944 abstracts he looked at, and that's what he looked at. So that's the size of your survey. 7,930 were excluded for expressing no opinion. In other words, they didn't give any opinion at all. So you can't claim that's a third gone already. So you're now down to 66.4. 3,000.
2/3 gone.
Well, no, it's a third gone. No, you've got 66.4 left. You've got a third gone. Okay. So then the next one is 3,896 were marked as agreeing we cause some warming. Well, I'd be in that because, even a butterfly flapping its wings, you could argue has an effect eventually. Yeah. So, so some warming because CO2 has caused some warming, minor, but some. Right. So we're now down to 32.6%. 64 were marked as stating we caused most of the warming. So the truth is, as regards most of the warming, which is the claim on the top, it's a third of 0.3%. 0.3%. And no were marked with endorsing man-made catastrophe, the climate alarm. They come in climate. And yet, in Britain, all our councils are declaring net zero, catastrophes, net zero. We're going to, and when you ask them to define it, they can't. When you ask them, they can't. So
what was that famous quote? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
That's right. And so you have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand what you're doing. And so that 97.1% is actually 0.3%. So it wouldn't matter if there was a consensus, by the way. it wouldn't matter. But it's actually only 0.3. So what they do is fiddle all the time. And of course, they don't argue. No one will debate me. No one will come live. I've had run-ins with professors, and all they do is try to smear me personally, but they don't ever want to debate. Nowhere. They run away from you. Not just me, but people run away from my ilk, if you like, people on my side, everywhere. Yeah, because they haven't got it. It is really a fiddle. Okay? So that's the second part of science. The third part is validation. Now, this is a very famous physicist. He was at the beginning of the of some brilliant breakthroughs in science. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. So what that means is you can think of what you like. I don't care how clever you are. But when you actually apply it to the real world, because science is trying to understand how the real world works, if the real world is different, you're wrong, not the real world. That's all that means, right?
In the third line where it says if it doesn't agree with experiment, is that saying if your theory doesn't agree with real world
Correct.
data, then your theory is wrong?
Yeah, because an experiment is putting your thing. An experiment is against the physical thing, is against the experiment to say, that's what I'm trying out. Does it work? And if the experiment doesn't work because it doesn't work in real life, that's what it means in science. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
And so there are those three rules then with science, but they don't apply them, you know. And so we come up to a conclusion then. Oh, and I want to show you now about the what's happened.
Right. So sorry to interrupt you. This phrase, "the science is settled," is just a nonsense.
Yeah. Well, look at these are all the climate models now. So we're looking at all the climate models, okay? And every squiggly line you see is a climate model, okay? And forget
who are these models by, Paul?
all the different scientists throughout the world who believe in this nonsense and build the models. And these are all, this is, you know, IPCC and all that. Because don't forget, the IPCC is a government body, but it takes in scientists and pays them to do the work, and they do the work. There's all the models. Now, some of them are up right at the top there, and some of them are down at the bottom. They can't all be right, can they? So if it was checked against experiment, you'd have one. If it was checked against life, you'd have one. So those are nothing more than opinions. And that is the basis of the entire alarmism.
What's the thick black line in the middle?
The thick black line is the average of all those opinions. So it's equivalent to sending 100 scientists into a hut and saying, come out with the average answer. And so the black line is the average answer of all the wrong results.
The average answer.
They're all wrong because they don't agree. Why don't they agree? Look at the squares and little blobs. There's circles and squares across the bottom. And one of those is the circles, that are the balloon data sets where we send up balloons. Yeah. And the other one is the sorry, I'll go back a sec. The other one is the actual satellite data. So that is across the bottom. That's what we're measuring in the real world. That's what the models say. So we know the models are wrong. To make it worse, to make this much worse, the IPCC take the worst of those. Yeah. So it's pure alarmism. There's no.
Okay. My understanding of this chart is along the 0.0 axis, you've got the blue squares and the black circles, and they are actual readings.
Yes.
And all of the colored lines and the black line, which is the average of those, is theoretical models.
Correct.
So what the scientists are saying is that the theoretical models all agree that the temperature is increasing, but the actual observations don't share that same outcome.
Yeah, therefore they're wrong.
Wow. Why don't they show the real results?
Well, they don't like that because it's a cult. In a cult, you can't have questioning. All the religious cults, those they all have leaders, and the followers obey every word and things, and do all stupid things. And the whole alarmism movement is a cult. It's not science, and so that leads us on.
So, in a way, going back to that original, the science is settled. Actually, the modelling is settled.
No, it isn't, because if it's settled, there'll only be one model.
All right, sorry. The average of all the models is settled, but the
But you
real
can't take-
live data
I'm
at the
sorry,
bottom is very different.
if I've got 100 wrong answers, none of which.
No, I was being
Yeah, I know you
facetious.
will. But if I've got 100 wrong answers, none of which agree with observation, right? The average of them is still wrong. Yeah.
Did the IPCC in the report, which my friend claimed was, the settled science, did it also include the blue squares and the black dots?
No.
It didn't.
No.
So it didn't show the real data. It only showed the models.
Yes. The whole
Wow.
Alarmism movement is based on theoretical models. The whole thing is based on.
Okay, right. Well, that's
That
alarming.
we know don't work. Right?
Thank you.
Okay. So we come to the conclusion. The origin of what we call civilization is not due to religion, but skepticism. This is how we've evolved. The modern world is the child of doubt and inquiry, as the ancient world was the child of fear and faith. Now I'll explain that. If I wanted to have a really good job going back 1,000 years or more, I would learn how the days got longer in the winter solstice. I would time them, and I'd say, if you give me a lot of money and if you pray to me and you make me a priest and you do all this, I'll tell you when I'll make the days get longer. Yeah. So you're going to do all this, and suddenly the next day the days start to grow longer. That is based on, that is a very clever way, but that is dogma, and science, and so it's very easy to have that. And so the modern world is a child of doubt and inquiry. It's true, and the ancient world of fear and faith. Right? Faith has no place in science. Science is based again on evidence, not faith. And science without debate is dogma. So my conclusion is most of the climate scientists, in fact, all I know of, are not scientists. They don't qualify as scientists. And the truth is they can't speak out either because they lose their jobs and they can't pay their mortgage.
Right, but at the end of the day, on that last chart, one is a bunch of models and the other is real data. And the real data and the model show two different things.
Yeah, of course. But all right, then I'll relate this to everyone watching. We were told polar bears are in trouble. They've trebled since the 1960s in population, trebled. Right. We're told time and time again, by 2000, the Arctic will be gone. The Arctic ice will be gone. By 2014, it'll be gone. By 2020, and it's actually not gone. It has natural cycles, but it's not gone at all. We're told that the Maldives will be gone by 2000 and so on. And they want to raise a lot of money to help them, right? They've actually grown by an average of 8%. Yeah. And so on. So you can't name a single of these predictions that the alarmists make that's turned out true. So my question to you is, if you had someone telling you, if you had a bloke walking past your door every day with a big poster saying the end of the world is on Friday, and he does this week after week after week, and the end of the world doesn't come, after a little while you lose faith in him, right?
And I'm old enough to remember, I think it was in the 70s, I can't remember exactly, but I remember for 5 or 6 years reading lots of articles in Time magazine that we're going to have another ice age.
Oh yeah, an ice age could come in a matter of decades. In the 70s,
Yeah.
we've done there's a whole film on it actually, featuring, and the narrator was Dr. Spock from Star Trek. And seriously, he went to all the scientists. Yes, it's terrible. It's and so on. And actually, these are natural cycles. And there are big cycles and there are little cycles, and they all interfere with each other. But we have a good understanding of them. And if you take a look at the cycles and don't let everything else get in the way, we're entering a cooling period now. And that's because the North Atlantic decadal oscillation, where the North Atlantic warms up, the whole of it, from the equator up, warms up by about 0.5 degree and then cools by 0.5 degree every 60 to 80 years for the full cycle. We're coming to an end now of the hot, right? There's a 200-year cycle, and there's a 1,000-year cycle. There's lots of different cycles. And then when you put them all together, and Valentin Zarkov from Northumberland University has done that, and we're now entering. And also, last October, the sun swapped its magnetic poles, which it does every 22 years, basically. and sorry, every 11 years, and started the drop in solar radiation. So in actual fact, there's a whole pile of factors coming together, a number of cycles coming together that look towards, it looks like we're cooling. Okay?
Okay, so at the end, I think we've got the end of section 1. My takeaways from this are that original phrase, "the science is settled," is nonsense, because science is never settled. And actually, even though there's a bunch of people with very good credentials who've come up with models which show one thing, the actual evidence shows something completely different.
Yeah. On that
Okay.
model, I'll go back. On that model, there is one, you can't really see it. It's down quite, it's down near the squares. I actually hit the squares at one time. It's the Russian model. And I gave a talk, Andrew Bridgen invited me to a talk in House of Commons in one of the committee rooms. And Monkton was there, Viscount Monkton. And he followed me on the talk. And I mentioned this Russian model is the only one that's even near. It's not on, but it's near, very near. And he stood up and said, "I can't believe this, because I'm the one who caused it to be near, because they'd made all these have made a mathematical mistake." And he pointed that out. He went to Russia and met the scientists. And once he started to explain it, he said, "Oh, I've got it. So they changed their model. And I didn't know he was going to follow me. So it's lovely when you tell the truth and you do something, and the person that follows you actually is able to, wow, these link together. Yeah, that's how that happened. That was great.
Right, but at the end of the day, on that sort of, please just go back to that last slide.
Yeah.
What the media and have been pushing for 20, 30 years, and even now in our education system, is that black line.
No, they've been pushing the very top models. No, they don't take the average even. They take the worst.
All right, well, all right, even worse than that. But they've been taking these models, whereas actually the observation data shows something completely different.
Correct.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Next up.
The science isn't settled.
Yeah.
And it never is.
I was on television on GB News, and the subject was, this is an example, and it's air turbulence. And I showed this graph here from the Federal Aviation Authority, and it shows the black line is clear air turbulence events throughout the world. And the black line shows there's no real pattern of clear air turbulence. Now, pilots can't avoid clear air turbulence because they can't see it. If there's proper air turbulence, normal, they can fly around it. But no, with that, so there's no pattern there, right? And yeah, a Reading University professor brought out a paper which they caused the television bit I was on, saying it's getting worse because of climate. They take a little model of part of the North Atlantic, not the world, part of the North Atlantic, and said, blah, blah, blah. So when I, on television, finished this off with that graph, because that's observation. So he's gone, he's wrong. There's no way out this, he's wrong. And it was the first time on television everyone's agreed with me, actually. and he went on Facebook and attacked me personally, doing all sorts of nasty things about me, which weren't true.
Okay, so just make sure that I and our viewers understand this chart. The black line at the bottom is accidents in aviation.
No, no, not accidents, it's just events of air turbulence.
Or incidents of...
It's when they get above a certain threshold, the turbulence.
Okay, and what's the blue line?
The blue line is the ordinary air turbulence. The ordinary air turbulence, and when you can see the turbulence, we've improved methods of flying around it as we brought in radar. So you'll see that big drop halfway through. Yeah, that's because we learned how to avoid. We had the instruments. The pilots could see the turbulence ahead and could avoid it. But with clear air turbulence, they can't do that.
Okay.
Okay. So the climate, right? Is climate science a science? True or false? Conclusion is that climate science is not following the basic rules of science. Sorry about misspelling there. It's not a science, but rather a propaganda machine. It isn't science. It's a propaganda machine, and those are the three tests, which are appeals to authority, no; consensus, no; validation, no; not science. That's what children taught in schools. That's what children should be. Shall we go on to the next one? Or do you want any more questions on that?
No, that's the statement, the science is settled. I think you've answered my question, that the science is never settled, and the evidence and the facts and the figures don't tie up with the models that have shown
No, they
what
don't.
people are talking about there. All right, thank you very much.
Next one. So the whole basis of the alarm is CO2. We treat it as a pollution, which is not. It's the gas of life. Without it, we'd all be dead. Yes. It's what plants breathe and give off oxygen. Yeah. And we'd have no plants without CO2. And so that's the question. Is CO2 the problem? Okay. So we'll go on now. And this is the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere in parts per million since 1960. And you can see there's a few dents in it caused by little recessions, actually. But basically, it's a nice curve going upwards, and it's increasing in its rate. Yeah. So CO2 is increasing. And on that curve, we put all the different COP meetings, the environmental, the big international meetings, like the one they're doing now, where they've knocked down all the trees on the Amazon on a 3-lane highway to make it for the meeting and all. You wouldn't believe it, would you? But anyway, this is it. This is measured on a mountain in the Hawaiian Islands.
I've actually been there. It's on the island of Kona, the big island in Hawaii.
That's right. And it's called the Scripps system. And so what this shows is that none of those conferences made any difference at all to the growth of CO2. The zigzag is caused by the seasons. So in the season when we absorb and the season when things die and give off, winter. And so depending on, because that's in the northern hemisphere, the zigzag could be the way around in the southern hemisphere. Okay.
Okay, so sorry, the line going from like 320 in 1960 to 420 in 2020 is showing that there has been an increase in CO2.
And that more importantly, none of the conferences, none of what we've done make any difference at all.
No, but it is showing that there is 100 parts per million or whatever it is growth in CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yes.
Okay. So CO2 is going up.
No doubt about that. No doubt.
Very good.
We all agree on that.
And so the big question is that a good thing, bad thing, or doesn't it make any difference?
Correct. There's 3 options, really. Okay, so to understand that, you have to look at the history of CO2. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do now is play a video. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is a short video going through the history of CO2, and I've tried to make it simple. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long, but it's an easier way to explain this. I think I took this out of a very recent thing I've done.
The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. In that time, there have been 5 ice ages. The Huronian, 2.4 to 2.1 billion years ago. But then there was a gap of 1,250 million years, followed by the Crinogenian, 850 to 635 billion years ago. That was the second ice age. Then with a shorter gap of 175 billion years, and it was in this gap that the Cambrian period started. That was the age when underneath the oceans the whole of life exploded. It was the beginning of all the higher forms of life on Earth. At this time, the CO2 levels were between 5,000 and 7,000 parts per million, 15 times higher than today. But life in the oceans boomed, so much for making the seas more acidic. Yet it was the shells that grew on animals big and small that when they died got buried, and with them they started to bury the CO2, though the life gas of CO2 then was high, but over the ages to come it was to get buried and buried and buried, and in the end risk the very idea of life on Earth. Now we'll continue our historic journey. Next was the Andean Saharan Ice Age, which lasted just 30 million years, to be followed by a gap of 70 million years. We then entered the Karoo Ice Age, one that lasted 100 million years, and during that time, that ice age sucked out more and more CO2 from the atmosphere. In a period known as the Carboniferous, 359 to 298 million years ago, where the trees that were growing died but couldn't be eaten by the bugs because the bugs hadn't wised up yet how to eat them, and therefore they got buried and formed the coal seams of today. In fact, all the coal seams in the world were formed in the Carboniferous period. Why? Because eventually the bugs wised up, learned how to eat the trees, and so when they fell down, they decomposed and didn't get buried anymore to form the coal seams. And after the Kuru Ice Age, there was a gap of over 257 million years, and during that gap, the supercontinent of Pangaea started to break up, and the volcanic activity from that breakup caused enormous amounts of CO2 to be projected into the atmosphere, thus greatly increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere to between 1,500 and 2,800 parts per million, and thus rescuing life on Earth, at least, as we shall see, for a while. Finally, we reach the Quaternary, the final ice age, and the ice age we live in now. But keep in mind that over the last 260 million years or so, under 3 million years has been an ice age. For the rest of the time, there's been no polar ice caps at all, neither in the Antarctic or the Arctic. Remember, as long as we have ice at the poles, we are in this Quaternary ice age. But there are glaciations within that ice age. And before I move on to that, just look at the history of CO2 that I've covered so far. But see here, as we came out of the Cambrian ice ages, with CO2 levels above 4,000 parts per million, and we see a rise and fall of CO2 levels. As the different ice ages, cold water sucked in the CO2 from the atmosphere, and in addition to that, the burying of life that had captured the CO2, that continual burying gave a downward trend to the CO2. So gradually, until the Triassic here, we were suffering less and less CO2. The Triassic increased it here, and then after that increase, the gradual decline started again. And if we had not done anything to increase CO2, by the time the Industrial Revolution came, we were down to 285 parts per million. Continuing that trend would mean that we'd reach the 150 parts per million within 2 million years, and life on Earth would cease to exist. But now we're going to look at a smaller period. We're going to first look at 400,000 years, the last 400,000 years, to see how CO2 and temperatures behave. This is the Earth, viewed from the North Pole downwards. It shows the extent of the glaciation some 400,000 years ago, and I'm going to take you in time through that 400,000 years to the present day. To make it easier to understand, I'm highlighting where the UK is. And I'm leaving a red dot there. And I'm also labelling the USA. And now I'm adding the temperatures throughout this period. By definition, as long as we have ice at the poles, we are still in an ice age. And what we have here is glaciations within the ice age with short warm climates between them. We're in one now. What I'm going to do now is take you from 400,000 years ago through the glaciations right up to the present. As you can see, the Earth's climate goes through major changes every 100,000 years or so. And besides those major climatic changes every 100,000 years or so, there's also lots of smaller climatic changes, all those jagged mountains. And don't forget, we live in a tiny portion of that. Remember, as the ice changes, the amount of ice at the poles changes, so do the sea levels and the contours of all this land. This period here, known as the Eemian, was a much warmer period than we are currently in. It had lower CO2 levels as well. The very last glaciation finished about 20,000 years ago, and that's the one that had half a mile of ice over Birmingham and a lot of New York under a lot of ice. So this warm peak here is the period we're in now, and it started about 11,000 years ago and is called the Holocene. Now the graph I'm using here is based on this graph. It's actually an 800,000 year graph, and I'm just taking the last 400,000 years of it. But by expanding it like this, at the bottom you can see the source for the data I'm using. But we are only going to look at the last 400,000 years, when there's been more and more glaciations, and in particular the last one here. Well, that's when you got the 1/2 mile of ice over Birmingham and lots of ice over New York. Now, all this data is lifted from ice cores. And the thing to note is that the blue line there, the CO2 line, follows the temperature. So as the oceans warm up due to other factors, give off the extra CO2, just like warming up a can of Coca-Cola gives off the CO2, and they follow. So the oceans contain about 50 times more CO2 than the atmosphere, and so as soon as they start to warm, they increase the CO2, so the CO2 always follows the rise in temperature. It isn't the cause of it. The big thing to note here is that these little periods where we go into the warm above the blue line, they're relatively infrequent. They last about 10 to 15,000 years, and we are now in one, and the one we're in is here. It's called the Holocene, and we're already about 11,000 years into it, with the norm being in the region of 10 to 15,000 years. So we haven't got long to go before we actually enter the next glaciation. And that, viewers, is the bad news. We are heading for a glaciation, and we don't know when it's going to come. But let's now zoom into the Holocene period we're in and have a look at that. Now, this graph is just that 11,000 years how into this gap in the glaciations. And it's the time, of course, when civilization as we know it grew. We have 3 graphs here. The black one is the temperature through the Holocene period, and the reference to the paper is printed on the graph there. The red one is the CO2 levels throughout this period, and the blue one is the CH4 levels throughout this period. That's methane. So just look first at the black ones, and look at this average curve, the purple curve. We've come out of the glaciation here and hit peak temperature, and then gradually, and there's been wobbles in it caused by various cycles, but gradually that temperature's declined and declined. And it is that decline that we're now in. We're now here, just past the Little Ice Age. And of course, we're just heading straight into the next glaciation period. On the way down this slide into the next glaciation, we of course have the previous warm periods. For example, the Roman warm period here, and the medieval warm period here. Our current warm period is, of course, now, but that's coming to an end. Of course, there are many other cycles within this data, hence the jagged nature of it. For example, the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation, which is the warming and cooling of the North Atlantic. That's got a period of 60 to 80 years. Below this video, you'll find a link to 1 or 2 videos about these cycles. But overall, there is no getting away from this slide into the next glaciation. So what can we learn from this graph? Well, just look at the red line, that's the CO2 level. Look at how it rises up from this really low level here. Well, as you're coming out of the very cold water of the previous glaciation, CO2 levels drop to around about 180 parts per million. Now, life really ceases to exist at 150 parts per million, and so we came very near to really extinction of life on Earth at that point, just 30 parts per million above the minimum. But nevertheless, as the oceans warmed, obviously they gave off more CO2. So you can see this rapid rise here in CO2 up to this point. That wasn't caused by mankind, of course. This is 11,000 years ago. So tracing along both the temperature curve here, and as you can see, the temperature curve rose, plateaued out, and then gradually started this decline towards the next glaciation. But at the same time, as it was at those high temperatures, much higher than today, the CO2 levels were much lower than today. Here, when the temperatures were highest, the CO2 was low. Yes? And then as you come along here, with all those high temperatures, the temperatures start to seriously drop, the CO2 goes higher. But we've got dropping temperatures with higher CO2, the exact opposite of what the alarmists claim. and the same arguments there for the methane as well. So there's no relationship whatsoever between the CO2 and the actual temperatures. It's actually cause and effect is the wrong way round with the alarmists. So that is that situation. And this basically shows without any doubt at all, and I've given all the publishers of each of those curves on there so you can look them up if you wish to. All the papers that give that data, it's all combined in one graph here. But that's where we are. Now we are heading into the next glaciation, right? So overall, we're going to be cooling. And if you think about it, I don't think anyone here in the UK is moaning about the weather being too hot. But it's already reached the alarmist levels, apparently, to the alarmists. It's already reached 1.5, 1.6. I can't see you all sweltering and complaining about the heat. Weather does vary, but climate is weather over a long time. You have to look at that and don't mix up weather and climate. And that's what the alarmists do.
Okay. Any questions?
I've got two questions. The first one, which is we can actually look at this chart. I've always understood from the media and what have you that it's the growth in CO2 that's causing the temperature to rise, whereas actually what your graph is showing the complete opposite.
Correct. And my graph is based on evidence, and the papers, the names of the papers are all on the graph there. Anyone can check, and it's based on evidence. Let me point something out. You'll hear a scare story. The seas are being turned acidic because we're increasing CO2. Now, at the moment, we're about 424 parts per million. But in the Cambrian period, when the explosion, the biggest explosion of life on Earth, and it happened in the sea, when that was going, it was maybe 5, 6, 7,000 parts per million. It wasn't acidic seas, was it? Otherwise, the shells couldn't have formed. The big shells formed, bigger than humans, we got fossils. So, but the trouble was, those shells sucked out the CO2, sucked it out, and when they died, buried it. So limestone is largely buried animals, yes? And so on. So actually limestone is one of the main ingredients in the aggregate of concrete. So we build our buildings today with concrete, which is basically dead animals. Yeah.
Right, but what you've shown is a clear evidence-based reversal of what we're being told, which is the more and more CO2 we pump into the atmosphere, the temperatures go up.
Yeah.
And it's actually the opposite. All right. So, but the second question observation, and I'm sorry if I don't remember, it was that long timeline chart. I can't remember if it was 800,000 years or.
Yeah, no, it's 550 million years, the big one. Yeah.
But there was one that had 800.
Oh, yeah, I was saying then there was 800,000, then there was 400, then there was 11.
Yes, right. Okay, but basically, if you look at that chart over 800,000 years,
Yeah.
there has been this. It looks like a ECG. It looks like it's the same pulse over 800,000 years.
Yes.
Goes up, goes down, settles in the middle, goes up, goes down, settles in the middle. I mean, that pulse has been pretty consistent for.
And the main.
Let me finish my point or question. How can anybody therefore say that what's going on now is human caused when nature has had this pattern for 800,000 years?
Well, for more than that. But let me explain. Those peaks really, I won't go into it. It's caused by what we call the Milankovitch cycles, those big peaks. So every 100,000 years, which they're spaced apart, that's to do with the distance of the Earth from the sun. Now, I'm going to say something shocking here. When Valentina Zarkov from Northumberland University, who's now predicting we're entering a cooling period from now until 2035, and when she does that, she checked and she realized that climate scientists didn't understand basic astronomy, basic solar system. And why? Because they thought, now this is a bit of a shock for people, they thought the Earth orbited the sun, and it doesn't. None of the planets orbit the sun. Does that shock you?
Slightly, yes.
Right? Let me explain. If you've got two suns, two stars, two planets, just by themselves in space, they'll revolve around each other, yes? And the point they're revolving around is in the middle, if they're both the same mass. Yeah? They'll revolve around the middle. But if you've got a big star and a small star, it won't revolve around the middle. It'll revolve around a point nearer to the big star. So as well as the sun pulling all the planets pull the sun.
Yeah.
So they actually orbit, the actual orbit point is called the barycenter, and it's outside the size of the sun, actually. It's outside it. And that changes all the time. It's quite a complex thing, but it's always outside the sun. So we orbit, because the sun's so massive, it pulls it very near the center it revolves around. But in effect, everything revolves around a center of gravity. Let me put it that way in simple terms.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's a good lesson for everyone. It's a good trick for everyone. Do the planets orbit the sun? And the answer is no. They orbit the barycenter, which is like the center of gravity of the planets and the sun.
No, that makes sense.
Right. That's one of the cycles. That's one of the cycles, by the way.
Right, but that chart you showed was fantastic, because what that showed me was over 800,000 years or much, much longer, there has been a very consistent pattern. Yes. Very consistent pattern. Yeah. And during that period of time, we've had 5 or 6 ice ages and And so what's going on the chart you've got on the screen now needs to be seen in the context of the same pattern going on for millions of years.
In other words, climate change has happened all the time. I'm called a climate change denier. I'm actually saying, no, it has happened all the time.
Yes, no, I get
You're saying what the other side is saying. No, everything's constant until man came along, which is silly, really silly.
I think that's a good way of summing it up, that we're made to feel bad that the temperature was consistent and constant forever.
Yeah.
And we've come along and screwed the whole thing up, which of course is not shown by the evidence.
In the Isle of Man, there was one of their experts actually stated, it's on tape actually, he actually stated that he'd like to have gone back to the weather of 1850 and things when it was all nice and calm. But you'll see later that we had the worst storms, the worst droughts, the worst everything. Do we want to go back to the Thames frozen over? Yeah, it's madness.
I did have another question, sorry. At one point on the chart, when the CO2 level was like 7,000 or 8,000, that's when all these new life forms were created.
Correct.
And at one point on the chart, and which in fact I can see here on the left-hand side, the CO2 was down to nearly 250 parts per million, but I think you said below 150, life ceases to exist on the planet.
Correct. Now the problem is this.
So we've been perilously close a few times with the reduction in CO2 to ending humanity because of a lack of CO2.
Correct. In actual fact,
but we're being told all the time that CO2 is threatening humanity.
Yes, I know. In actual fact, the biggest threat to humanity, or not to life on Earth, gradually CO2, life has been a temporary experiment on Earth. It's only been Earth's roughly 4.5 billion years old. Over the last roughly 500 million years, 550 million years or so, when modern forms, higher forms of life happened, we've had a gradual decrease in CO2. It's been up and down because as Pangea separated the continents, that caused a huge amount of CO2 in, gave us a temporary reprieve. If you take that line further, 2 million years, we'd all die. So gradually life is burying CO2. That's the story of the Earth. Once, the last time we had a glaciation, it went down to 180. Now, had we not put CO2 in, next time it might have reached the 150. So each glaciation coming is going to suck out more, because in the meantime, life is burying it. Yes. So it's always getting worse. So in actual fact, putting CO2 in may have extended higher forms of life on Earth by a number of tens of thousands of years, maybe. Don't forget, we've got the glaciation coming fairly soon, 1,000 to 2,000 years away.
I mean, just to go back to this section, which we're being told that CO2 is the enemy, is the problem.
Yeah.
The evidence suggests the exact opposite.
Yeah, we need more of it. Hence my badge. I love CO2 because we need more of it. And we'll come to that. Okay.
But there's another point, which is, and I think about this in relation to lots of other topics that the Truth Contract is exploring. We just have this strange sense to me that mankind makes any difference to what's going on the planet, that we can actually control nature and change nature. Whereas if you actually look over millions of years, nature does a pretty good job of taking care of the planet and the system all by itself in these huge patterns that keep repeating. So almost the arrogance to think that we've come along and made much difference at all is ridiculous.
Absolute arrogance. Yeah. We need to move on for time, I think. So we get.
Sorry, Paul. Yes, sorry.
Right. So that's today there. That's just showing this thing. You can see the today on the right. That's what we're in now. It was much hotter in the previous warm one. It was much higher, the temperature. Yeah. And again, as you go further back, much higher. So if you take the line down from the second one in, we had these little beeps. There's other big cycles going on. But basically, the pattern is less and less heat. Less and less heat.
Yeah.
And that's a video. I won't play it. This is the last 300 years. So this is the last 300 years. And what you've got is the warming started 150 years before the Industrial Revolution. So that can't have been man, can it? Right? So with the last 300 years, we've been warming for 300 years. But they'll pretend we've only happened after 1850. And of course, between 1850 and 1960, there was very little CO2 actually went into the atmosphere from man. And from 1960 onwards is what they claim, which is why that graph I showed you about CO2 growth started then.
And sorry to ask a really, what are the benefits to the planet and humanity of the temperature slowly over a period of time increasing like it shows on this graph?
This is very recent, every single warm period has been the time when civilization has really expanded, right? That's every single one. We have dark ages when it's cold and civilization doesn't. Warmth has always benefited man, always, right?
Very good. All right. Well, I think we've come to the conclusion that CO2 is not only not the problem, it's actually something that we ought to be grateful for and have more of.
Okay, well, now here's the conclusion. Is CO2 the problem, true or false? And the conclusion is the entire claim that CO2 is endangering the planet is false. We actually need more of it.
No, I think you've made that very clear. Thank you.
Right. So now we go on to 3, extreme weather, increasing, true or false. And this is the alarmists they use. This is the alarmism they use. Now, this is much easier to check, actually, for people. Yeah.
Sorry, just to clarify, the alarmists are saying that not only has extreme weather increased, but that increase has been caused by human activity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. So actually, extreme weather's got less. So let's actually start to examine. I'm going to fairly quickly whip through because I've got over 200 videos on all of this I'm covering. But I'm going to quickly rip through to show you how extreme the lie is. It's a total fabrication that extreme weather is increasing, right? So let me go through. Now, what they do is they show things like this on telly. This is very short. So they scare people, don't they? With things like that. They say, look, extreme weather, dramatic, all the mainstream media, blah, blah, blah. Right? Let me give you little examples of how they lie. The Met Office, our Met Office, May was the warmest on record. May was the warmest on record. Right? Okay? This is quite recent. This is June the 7th, 2024.
Mm-hmm.
That May was the warmest on record. That's what everyone's told. They show you nice pictures of people going out to the beach and enjoying themselves. You're not meant to enjoy yourself in warm weather. Okay, what's the truth? Well, the longest temperature record in the world is called the Central England Temperature Record. Yeah, that's the longest in the world, starting in the 1600s. Yeah. So what does that say? And that says, actually, the hottest was in 1883. So it couldn't have been caused by CO2 from man, could it?
And it wasn't the hottest on record, clearly, either.
No. I mean, when we say record, there was a time before 1600. There was a time like in the previous 550 million years. So this is what they do. Sometimes they'll say it's the hottest on record for 50 years. But that meant it was hotter 50 years ago. So don't ever be caught by that trick. Okay? So when you look at the data, it's very different. This is the Hadcroft data. Hadcroft data comes from East Anglian University, a centre of alarmism. And the trend there, it's actually negative slightly, but we'll call it between 2016 and 2020, the Earth became slightly cooler. That's the Earth, according to Hadcroft. The next one, the party told you to reject the evidence, your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. George Orwell, 1984. And this is what they're expecting you to believe. To ignore what you see, ignore what you hear, ignore what you feel. Right. So 16 cold years after 1998. This is the RSS global mean temperature change, 222 months from 96 to May 2015. Right. Again, showing a slight decline. So that's climate. It's not weather. It's climate because it's over a long time. Right. So I'm going to play something about droughts now. Okay. Now, what they said on the BBC was the worst drought in 30 years hit South Africa. So 30 years ago, there was a worse drought then. Yeah? You see what I mean? That's that trick being exposed. And I actually am an expert in this particular subject. So I'm just going to play this. This is in order of the worst droughts. That's 1765 was the worst ever.
All in the UK, yeah.
All UK. This is just the UK. There's the 1976 drought, way down the list. No, it was much worse in the past. So when we come to droughts, it's much worse in the past.
That was UK droughts, an excerpt out of my video on the subject. But how about global droughts? And here's the Global Drought Index. As you can see, no need to panic here. And going back 1,000 years, the same for Central Europe.
By the way, I mean, this is the drought of the 1870s, when 50 million people died. And remember, you saw that was 1870s, wasn't even the 1700s, which are worse, right? That's natural climate disasters from the past on a scale we don't know, because they're less extreme now. And this is the droughts in America. You can see the 1930s and the Dust Bowl there. Above 1935 there, that's the Dust Bowl period. Droughts were far worse. So no matter where you look, they were worse. But then let's look at another fiddle by our Met Office. This is from the Met Office. New research shows increasing frequency of extreme rain. Extreme rain is increasing. Claim. So do you know what I did? I went to the Met Office record. I'll play the video. It's very short. So what we've got here is the rainfall from 1840, which the Met Office have got. And rainfall's a very good measure. It's quite easy to measure, really.
Just like rainfall. We've actually increased rainfall average since 1850, but at the same time, we've reduced the extremes. So we don't get the big droughts of the 1800s, nor do we get the big floods of the 1800s. The range has become less.
So that's important.
We have less extreme weather.
Yeah.
So that's very important because of course, they're claiming it's extreme weather's getting worse, but using their own data on rainfall, it's not. Yes, and there's a reason for it. All weather is caused by differences. So if everywhere was the same temperature, everywhere was the same pressure, there'd be no weather. And there is a planet like that. I forgot which one it is, but no weather. So when you've got it hot in one place and cool in another, or different pressures, then because obviously heat rises, right, whereas cold drops, as it were. Those cause different pressures, and then you get the different pressures. You see the isobars on the weather charts. Difference is weather, and one of the basic reasons why we have less extreme weather is this: The Earth warms from the poles. It doesn't warm from the center. It warms from the poles or cools from the poles, right? The temperature changes in the poles going to the middle. The middle, the equator, stays roughly the same. So the difference, when the difference is less between the equator and the poles, you get less extreme weather because there's less need to adjust, right?
Paul, does this graph show the black line that goes through the middle, which is presumably
Yes.
some average?
Yes.
Does that show that since 1840 we're getting more rainfall every
Correct.
year?
We are. Yes, it does. We are getting more rainfall because the planet has warmed by roughly 1.5 degrees since 1840 or so, and that extra heat means the atmosphere can hold more moisture. Yeah. By the way, my own work on this in hydroclimatology studied river flows from a rain-fed river, so there's no springs, just the rain. And that gave a beautiful dampened effect of all the rainfall taken. It's like having, instead of a little pot to collect the rain, you've got the whole catchment. And I found the sun cycles in that. So I found how the sun cycles affect the rainfall. Yeah.
No, I appreciate this is only in the UK, not global.
Yeah,
But
because
what this is showing is that since 1840, we're getting a bit more rain, but the extremes
less.
temperature have almost collapsed in half.
Yes, correct.
Right.
I did the UK to show you the lie of our Met Office, right? So, in the International Journal of Climatology, I'll read it out. The storms of the 1980s and 1990s were very much more severe than since 2000 because they were talking about Storm Eunice, was a severe storm in 2014. But these storms are as nothing compared. We had it much worse before. So storms are getting less, according to the International Journal of Climatology.
Right.
Right? Next one. I mentioned before this Atlantic, and if you look down here, if you look down at that little globe, you'll see the warm North Atlantic from the equator up. That's the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, 60 to 80-year cycle, right? When it is warmer, right, you get fewer storms, just as I explained, because there's less difference between the equator and the poles. Okay. So next one, forest fires. So forest fires, big scare, big scare.
Well, looking at this graph and how forest fires are growing, maybe one should be concerned. Well, be concerned until you realize, and you go back in time with this graph,
Yeah.
what we're suffering now from is nothing compared to the past, as you can see. But more important, when President Biden came into power, he had all this part of the graph deleted from the official records. This is intentional hiding of historic data.
Right. Now, the notice it increased in the 1990s. It started to increase forest fires. That's because instead of doing forestry management, they introduced wokeness into forestry management, which Trump is now putting back correct. Are you with me? So they let the ground load rise and rise and rise. All trees have to die. And normal fires are a normal thing for all forests. Because one day there'll be something happened, spark from a lightning hit or something, and so on. And the Aborigines in Australia will burn through. They're traditionally that if the ground load of rubbish is getting too high, they'll burn it through so it can pass through without burning the trunks of the trees. If you let it build up, it gets too intense, and as it passes, it starts to burn the trees. It's all to do with forest management. That pure wokeness.
Right, but the point we were trying to get to at the beginning is extreme weather increasing? And the answer is no, it's not.
And fire weather's not increasing, actually.
Which is extreme weather, yeah.
A global balanced area burn. There's the top graph. The whole world. That's a graph there of the area burn for the whole of the world, based on satellites and other information that they can get. At the bottom is just a histogram showing that as regards the world, we're getting less and less burnt area. Right, this is NASA. Globally, the total acreage burnt by fires for each year declined by 24% between 1998 and 2015. So that's how NASA did it, by measuring it by satellite. This is not the stuff you hear in the news, is it? And yet I'm quoting official sources. Yeah. So on fires, rubbish. Rising sea levels. Okay. Right. Now, I have to explain this one.
So this graph is a post-glacial sea level rise. That's since the last glaciation, when we had the half a mile of ice, whatever it was, over Birmingham, and it all melted. And that melting ice, which was on land, because melting ice in the sea like the Arctic doesn't count, but the on land ice that melts raises sea levels. And it rose rapidly here until it sort of slowed down eventually. It had done its melt. And about 8,000 years ago or so, it started this gradual sea level rise, which we're now in. But hold on here. The graph really isn't big enough to show it, but this tiny amount here in this 24,000 year cycle is apparently due to us. So let's look at that in more detail.
Okay. So this is the Germany. This is a long record. It goes back to 1840, showing the sea level rise there in Germany at Cuxhaven is actually that constant thing we had as per the previous graph. If it were rising sea levels because of CO2, that would curve up. There's no curve. So what you have to look for around the world, as I show you, is upward curves. There's none. So, oh, that's a downward curve in Sweden. That's sea level dropping. Actually, it's not. Sea level, because Scotland had a lot of ice over it in the Ice Age. So as the ice lifted, the Earth bounces back. So Scotland is rising and the south of England is sinking. And in Sweden, they had a lot more ice and Sweden is rising. All the land is rising. And so it looks like the sea's dropping, but it isn't. It's the land rising. Okay, just to show you that. And this is going around the world, a lot of major cities, all straight lines, no upward curves. We do not have a problem with rising sea levels. Full stop. Next. Barack Obama, despite all his alarmism, that's his house in Hawaii. And the house is actually on the sea. You can see his house is a meter or so above sea level. I call that hypocrisy. Okay.
Okay, so extreme weather increasing is doesn't appear from all of your evidence.
No, I've got to, but I've got to quickly whip through it if you don't. Just a sec. Tuvalu was the most extreme case for sinking. That was the first island in the world that was going to sink. And recently, the Prime Minister, the head of Tuvalu, was there on a bit of coral, asking for more money.
So here we have the leader of Tuvalu, a little island in the Pacific, destined to be the most prone island to sink in the world. And the leader here is appealing for more money. But the facts are, 1, Tuvalu has grown by 2.9%. But not only that, hundreds of Pacific islands and Indian Ocean islands have grown. It's all fake news.
On record, this is the Great Barrier Reef has grown. It's really the healthiest it's been on record. That's another one that's false. The 50 years hunting ban, polar bears are thriving. They've trebled in size now, population. That's another false alarm. The IPCC. Now, this is really important, this one. The IPCC themselves, the scientists, are different to what they say. Because what the politicians read is the summary for the policymakers. The summary for the policymakers is written by politicians. It's not written by scientists, right?
Sorry, Paul. IPCC is part of the UN?
It is, yes.
Right.
It's part of the UN.
Does the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say from the UN? Well, don't forget, they are a government panel, a political panel, not scientists. What they say and the data they have are two different things.
Right. This is a table. That they go on, right? And basically, what this table shows, and I'm going to play the video to explain it. This table is already emerged in historical record. This is where mankind, as they've detected an influence of mankind. Yes? So I'm going to play this now.
So no trace from mankind historically with frost, mean precipitation, that's rainfall, river floods, heavy rainfall, that's heavy precipitation, pluvial floods, that's urban floods in cities, etc., landslides, aridity, that's very dry air, hydrological droughts, agricultural and ecological drought, bioweather, that's conditions for forest fires, wind speed, Severe windstorms, tropical cyclones, that's hurricanes, etc., sand and dust storms, snow, glacier and ice sheets, heavy snowfall and ice storm, hail, snow avalanche, coastal sea flood, coastal erosion, marine heat waves, and ocean acidity, air pollution, and last of all, weather radiation at the surface.
Now, that is amazing. So the intergovernment, the heart of all the alarmism, all those things, they haven't found any influence of mankind in. So when it comes to floods, hurricanes, when it comes to droughts, no influence. No influence can be found by mankind. Well, that's not what you're told. And that is the lie. There's a total lying system. It's almost built into it now. And that's very, very important to understand. When I present people with this data from the IPCC, it's as if it's like presenting Dracula with a crucifix. You go, can't be, but it's true. Okay. So the conclusion on extreme weather, then we can talk. Extreme weather increasing, true or false? It is false. Extreme weather is decreasing because weather is all about differences, adjusting from one area to another. The less difference between the poles and the equator, the less extreme weather. But as we cool, extreme weather will increase.
What's so interesting for me is that many of the people I've spoken to over the last 3 or 4 years who said, David, the science is settled. And when I've said to them, where do you get the science from? They've said, from the IPCC.
Correct.
But actually what the IPCC are saying, as you've just showed us, is opposite to what people think it's saying to them.
Yes, except for warmth. They say heat is caused by man, the warming. Except for warming, all the rest they can't find any evidence of. Now, the reason is that they put one representative from each country, a political representative, in a room, and for the report they put up each sentence with a red and green light. And it starts off red, and they have to agree the sentence, then it goes green. It's a political document. It's called a summary for policymakers, written by politicians, and what the aim is to transfer wealth from the developed world to the undeveloped world. It's got nothing to do with science. It's all about a transfer of wealth. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Thank you.
Right. Green energy cheaper, true or false? Yeah. Okay.
9 times cheaper, Mr. Miliband was saying in the election, and
Correct. Yeah. I'm actually going to play a video now I made specially for this particular.
This is the government table for the agreed prices paid onshore wind farms. And you can see that the price is £50.90 per megawatt hour. They're all that price. Okay, but those figures are in 2012 prices. And so £100 invested according to the Bank of England Retail Price Index calculator in 2012 is worth £140.96 today. That gives a 41% inflation factor. And that is up to January. So any further months, obviously you'd increase that. So we now have to increase that £50.90 by 41%. And the result is £71.77 per megawatt hour. For offshore wind, they pay more. They pay £58.87 in 2012 prices, which is £83 per megawatt hour in today's prices. Now, quickly going over the rest, floating offshore wind works out to £197.30 per megawatt hour, and tidal power an astonishing £242.52 per megawatt hour. And whilst we're at it, on the same basis, the cost of solar is £70.60 per megawatt hour. But they are only part of the costs. Extra cost one is constraint payments. These are the payments you have to make because those prices are not based on taking power when you need it. They're based on taking what power they're enabled to supply in theory, even when you don't need it. And those constraint payments, according to Ed Miliband's own department, could reach £19 billion by 2030. £19 billion a year by 2030. Because as we expand wind and solar and all this green madness, we are going to incur more and more surplus when we don't need it. All you need is a windy night with low demand, yeah? And then you're into huge extra constraint payments. So there's that one. Secondly, we have losses in infrastructure. What's that? Well, all these things are remotely connected, they have long lines of transmission. And besides the cost of that, there's the actual drop in the amount of energy that reaches the other end, because they're not paid for what they give to the grid, they're paid for what they can produce at source. Those losses in transmission can be as much as 17%, which can add almost 20% to the cost of the energy in that alone. And thirdly, the entire grid of gas supplies, the entire gas industry has to be kept in standby. Well, that's a huge cost. They have to be able to step in and out as the last resort, if you like. And that is going to cost a fortune. Now, it's not possible for Ed Miliband's target of only 5% gas by 2030. That's ridiculous. But at times, we almost need 100% gas. And there's no way around this. So the extra cost of keeping all that staff, all those stations open, and all of that is enormous. Because basically with renewables, you're building a new system alongside the existing system. And the fourth extra cost is the grid infrastructure. You need a new grid infrastructure to collect all this power in all these multiple places, whereas one gas station could supply 80 megawatts of power as and when you need it. To do that with renewables, you need hundreds of stations. And you've got to put all these into the grid. And that's going to result in thousands and thousands of electric pylons ruining our countryside. But there's a huge extra cost in doing that. And it's estimated by the National Grid at £12 billion a year between now and 2030, just for that. Had we had gas alone since 2005, instead of bothering with all this new renewable nonsense? According to Professor Hughes from Edinburgh University, who's done the detailed calculations, we would have saved £90 billion. But that sum is just tiny compared to the other costs we'll have going forward, and it's tiny compared to the decimation of our industries, all those industries we've exported due to this total green nonsense.
Any questions on that?
I did have one question. When you were going through solar and wind and tidal and showing the cost per megawatt hour, I think it was, what is, and I think they range from like 70 up to 240. What's the cost of gas per megawatt?
Gas is one of the most efficient most efficient things. If you've got gas in your house, you're burning the fuel in the house. You're not having an intermediate thing. But the cost of raw gas at the moment going in the UK is about £34 per megawatt hour, coming out about 50 odd. But it's a bit distorted because gas prices, even at that, are distorted by the green, because they're not able to produce it efficiently, because they're off and on and all sorts of things. But basically, it is much cheaper to have gas, much cheaper. Let me put it this way. Also, there's no world price for gas. If you take gas in America, it's a quarter of the price than it is in the UK. A quarter. Yeah? So this idea there's a world price you've got to pay. If we were fracking, they say, oh, well, you'd have to export it world price. Rubbish. And when they say gas prices dictate the price each day, that is a total lie. A total lie. Right?
So, sorry, it clearly isn't a global market if America's gas is a quarter of the price of ours. So
it can't be.
So at a high level, why is their gas so much cheaper than ours?
Right, they frack. It's as simple as that. They frack.
Okay.
We've got enough fracking, with some estimates put it at 400 years of supply in the UK. Right, we should be having nuclear as the base, because the nuclear, coal, all those can't change quickly. So
okay, but so just to press pause, Paul, before we jump down those rabbit holes, the question we're trying to answer, true or false, is green energy cheaper?
Much more expensive.
And if gas, which is made more expensive because of the switching on and off, is about, I think you said 35 or 40?
34 pounds.
But every other green energy that you showed, solar, is more expensive.
Yeah, up to 6 times, yeah. But that is a lie as well, because what you're paying for, when you see that price of £81, £83 for offshore, or £80 for onshore, whatever it is, when you see that price, you've now got to allow for all the extras, what it's causing. So you've got to allow for the extra infrastructure, the extra grids, the extra pylons, and so on. So to take just the raw price of the wind,
No, I understand there's lots of hidden costs that need to be added back in.
huge amount.
Right, but there's another point, surely, which is that with 4 or 5 times more expensive energy costs in the UK than in the US, for example, how on earth can we have a manufacturing business base that competes with that?
Oh.
So the opportunity cost and the knock-on consequence cost of this in terms of our industrial and economic base must be gigantic.
It's beyond anything you can imagine, because we've done away with our steel industry. We now have to import it, increasing CO2, by the way. We put a biofuel station in with Drax that doubles the CO2 of coal, by the way, right? Double. Right. We make such stupid decisions, it's beyond belief. Our motor industry is now being decimated in Europe, including the UK. Now we're losing it all because of the stupid rules that people don't understand. Our politicians haven't got a clue. They really don't qualify as having a brain when it comes to science or technology.
Okay, but so to summarize, green energy is more expensive than gas.
Yeah.
And it's going to remain so.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately going to destroy our economy and manufacturing capability, etc.
Yeah, it won't work. We haven't got the money. It won't work. It can't work, but we'll be devastated, as we are being devastated in the meantime. This one I've got on the screen now is another study of a 5-year period up to about October 24, where if we'd not had the gas, but we'd gone through the Ukraine crisis with gas, there's the high prices of energy in the middle. That's caused by Ukraine crisis. But even if we'd had that, we'd have saved £18 billion in the 5-year period by not having renewables. Right. And by the way, there's a big thing going on because nearly all the wind power industry has had the share prices drop off a cliff. And the reason is they've overestimated the lifetime of wind farms.
The capital equipment.
Yeah, instead of 25, 30 years, which is the lie, it's more like 15 years. There's one just being closed just now, being closed in Germany, right? And because of that, you see, the model works. You develop a wind farm and you've got a balance sheet to do that. So you develop a wind farm and then you have to sell it to the pension funds and everyone. Well, there's a nice secure income. You're guaranteed for everything you could produce, never mind whether you need it or not, you're going to get paid. Yeah. But the trouble is, that's based on a 30-year period for the capital. And when it's only half of that, they end up having no money at all, just repaying the capital. Therefore, I've done my most popular video is a video that studied the economics of that.
We'll make sure that we get all of these videos in your YouTube channel where all the videos are in a link in below all of that conversation.
We're having to whip through lots of things. So a biofuel.
Biofuel is not only far more expensive than normal fuel, but actually emits twice the amount of CO2 if you take the whole thing into account.
And the land use is being removed from poor people who are being starved. It's causing hunger. And the gas, compared to gas at £34 per megawatt hour, no international gas price, I've already mentioned that. They were just some talking points which we've covered. But biofuel is not an answer. It destroys areas. It is environmentally damaging in every way, and it actually increases CO2 emissions.
This is a short video I made looking about the lie of green energy from the environmental aspect and the way it kills birds and all sorts of things. Anyway, I'll show you this short video.
Okay, wind farms are bird mashing machines. Bird mashing machines. That's a bald eagle, by the way. But they are really, they actually kill so many birds, the raptors come in and they get killed looking for the birds. In Germany's study proved wind turbines slaughter millions of bats every year. In one area in the North Sea, 90% of the diving bird population is gone by the wind farm. 90% reduction. So to claim all this is green is nonsense. But environmental studies in the UK aren't needed for these. They are needed for solar farms. They are needed for wind farms. They ignore it because that's the only way they can get past the lie. Right. I want to make a very important point. When you see, and this is important, when you say this wind farm will power so many houses, this exposes a lie as just a matter of simple maths.
every single solar and wind farm in the UK. They all tell you how many homes they can supply. In this case, I'm taking Owl's Hatch, which is a solar farm. It's the largest UK one. So I'm taking that as an example. But as I say, it applies to every single wind and solar farm. So here we have their claim, their own claim. This is from their website. 49,305 megawatt hours a year are supplied. And that supplied, they claim, to 12,978 homes. So per home, this is what you get. And the answer is 3.8 megawatt hours per year for each home. So looking now to Ofgem, you get 11.5 megawatt hours per annum of gas and a 2.7 megawatt hours per year of electricity needed. But the total of those two for the home is you need 14.2 megawatt hours of energy, and not just the 3.8 megawatt hours supplied by the wind or solar farm. So basically, when wind and solar farms quote the number of houses to you, in broad terms, what they mean is this. We can supply, say, 10,000 homes, providing 80% of the energy is coming from gas power. And we need the backup gas for when the wind does not blow or the sun does not shine. Plus, we need those gas stations to be spinning on standby. We also need you to pay us even when it is windy overnight and you do not need the energy.
That's a true statement, you see. So they all fiddle the numbers. They assume 80% gas, and yet they're doing away with the gas. So make sense of that, or they want to. And by the way, these are constraint payments. If you look there, you'll see that this top one, the Corrigarth, 51% of the time is paid not to produce energy. That's very typical. There's the percentages down the discarded, right? And you can see there, if you look in the middle, where gas is, the blue, and look at the green, which is the wind, has died to next to nothing. So the UK at that point in time was surviving purely on gas and imports, besides the base of nuclear we have and things. So imports and gas kept us going. Wind, nothing. And by the way, if you plot the chart, this is from Bjorn. If you plot the chart there, you'll see that all the most expensive countries in the world for energy are the ones with the most renewables per population. And I've done my own chart on that I call the PB chart, which it works out how much green energy per 100,000 people, and it's always well more expensive. So
just make sure we quickly understand that chart. What's it saying about Denmark?
it's saying Denmark is way out there. It's the most expensive. It's got the highest. It's 60% renewables, and it's got the highest price.
And Indonesia's got the lowest price and the lowest percentage of
Indonesia,
renewables.
which is coal powered and that, and so on. And there's countries in there like Norway, which have introduced green stupidly, but they've actually got a lot of cheap hydro. Hydro is a marvelous source, but we don't have it, so we only have a tiny bit. We can't do any more. So basically, you've got to believe not the evidence of your pocket. So besides your eyes and ears, you can't believe the evidence of your pocket as you're being charged more and more for electricity, and they're telling you it's cheaper and cheaper, because that is the truth. I mean, if that doesn't expose a lie, nothing does. Okay.
No, I've experienced that myself in the last 5 years, where I think I'm paying 5 times more, for the same supply of electricity as I was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Our last one is net zero needed or possible, true or false. Now, this is the amount of oil, gas, and coal being burnt in the world over time.
Oh, sorry, just before you jump into this, sorry to interrupt you. Just remind our listeners, what is net zero?
Net zero is to have the country you're in, or the world, so it's actually not increasing CO2 at all. Not at all. And it's in balance. So we don't increase the amount of CO2 being put into the atmosphere.
So we still produce it, but
we have to counter it somehow.
Right.
Okay. So this is our world in data. Again, this is from the Energy Institute. Today we burn more gas, oil, and coal than we've ever done in human history. Today. That's up to 2022. It's still the same in 2024 and 2025. So how come if we're burning more than we've ever done in human history, we're going to decrease CO2? We're not. It's meaningless. What we're doing is meaningless. We're just pretending. It's the emperor's clothes. We're pretending we've got clothes on. We're pretending somehow we're having an effect. I'm talking worldwide here. So worldwide, we're having no effect at all. None at all. Right? And we're not going to. Let's go to the next slide. Right. If you look at wind energy split, which is put in a different way, gas, oil, and coal dominate. And if you take wind, it's 2.2%, solar's 1.4%. And biofuels, which are a ridiculous way to do it, are 4.1%. We're dominated by it. We're never going to increase. We're never going to do it. So net zero is not possible. Right. And energy scientist Václav Smil puts the total cost of achieving net zero by 2050 at US dollars 444 trillion. 444 trillion. Or US 17 trillion a year for 25 years, requiring affluent economies to spend 20 to 25% of their annual GDP on transition. So net zero by 2050 won't happen, and the increase in global temperature will not be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels that was agreed or preferred in the Paris 2015. Nowhere near it. But he assumes, because he is now an energy scientist, who still goes in for it's going to increase the temperature, which it isn't. So, but the point he's making there is the $444 trillion to get to it. It's not going to happen. So the question was, is net zero going to happen? The answer is no. In this one, the Met Office weather stations, right? This is the accuracy of them, and only 13.7% can actually read to within 1 degree centigrade. But they'll tell you all sorts of lies about 0.1 being a record. They can't even read that close. And I've got a whole history on that. And there's only gas for backup. There's no other choice. We have to have gas for backup. We have to have something that can be fast. But for gas to backup, it has to waste. It can use 50% of the energy in standby waiting to come on. Because with a cloud passing over, or clouds passing over on solar, or the gust just or stopping, or too much wind when the wind turns and starts to switch off. Those things can happen like that. You have to have something quick, so you have to have standby deals, and those cost a fortune. And we're paying up to £5,000 and £10,000 per megawatt hour to cope with things like that. That's a whole other subject I've gone into in my videos, right? And this, by the way, is the marvelous idea of having CO2. This is the cereal production in the world. It's at record levels. The bottom black line is the land use for cereals. We haven't increased the land use. So without any more land being used, over the years since 1960, all the food production has increased in cereals. And the same for corn and so on, right? So everything's increasing because of the extra CO2, which is plant food. We put plant food, CO2 into greenhouses for the same reason, right? And that's, so is net zero needed or possible, true or false? Conclusion, false. It is not needed. The opposite is needed, more CO2, and it is not affordable or practically possible. And so what's going to happen in the next few years is all this is going to crash to pieces, and a huge failure with stupid politicians leading it, and politicians like your MP who won't answer the question, won't face you. My MP, the previous who's now lost his seat, but my MP just attacked me personally when I raised the subject, rather than verbally, rather than deal with the subject, because they can't. They don't know what they're talking about. That's the end of it.
So my understanding at a high level is that China is building 1.5 to 2 new coal-fired power stations per week, and India 1 a week, and other places around the world. And I think since being elected, Donald Trump's come out and questioned the net zero targets and said they should be scrapped and reversed, what have you. So this appears to be, as far as I can see, a Western European ideology as opposed to a global consensus. Is that correct?
Absolutely spot on. It's the Western developed nations, so it can be Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, Europe, It's the Western developed nations, and the whole thing is about a transfer of wealth by the United Nations from those nations to other nations. It's all about globalism and a world economy. We're all one country, etc. It's not to do with climate. It's nothing whatsoever to do with climate. They seized on CO2 as being the control. If you control CO2, that's a gas of life. If you can control that, you control how you travel, you control what you eat, you control everything. And actual fact, all those things are in place. All those things are in place to control you. And so the whole thing is a scam from top to bottom. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I hate conspiracy theories. But I'm afraid this one is true. It's the biggest conspiracy theory that's ever been in the history of the world.
Okay, let me just see if I can have absorbed everything you've brilliantly shared. So essentially, going back 20, 30 years ago, we had a gas-powered energy system in this country that worked perfectly fine.
Coal as the base.
Sorry, coal
and nuclear as a base. That's the thing. That can't change quick. So that's your base. For that variation in the day, we had gas.
Ah, okay. But we don't mine coal anymore.
No.
And we're down to one nuclear power station.
We closed the last coal station last week.
So 30, 40 years ago, our base electricity energy supply was coal and nuclear with a top up from gas.
Correct.
We've closed coal down and we've closed nuclear down, or closing it down.
Yes.
And now, for a period of time, gas has been the main source of energy.
Well, it's been what fills in. Gas can do the whole lot. So gas could do everything.
Okay, so here's my question.
But nuclear,
if gas could do the whole thing,
yes,
and wasn't just being used to top up, as and when needed.
Yes.
If I've heard you correctly, we would have saved £90 billion if we hadn't introduced renewables.
If we'd have just kept where we were in 2005, with what we had, we'd have saved 90 billion between, and this comes from Professor Hughes in Edinburgh University, and he's correct. He actually goes into the account. He's an economist, so he went into all the accounts of everything and so on, and we'd have saved £90 billion till now.
In 20 years?
Yeah, in just energy costs. Yes, in 20 years, in just energy costs. But those are just energy costs, right? And all the subsidies to do with green and everything. But it does not account for the loss of industries.
No. We chatted about that a few minutes ago. So if we had left the system where it was 20 years ago, we would have spent 90 billion less just on the energy.
Yes.
And you add on top of that the knock-on consequences of having 5 times more expensive energy and the reduction, the cost of the economy and the loss of taxation and jobs and all the rest of it would have been huge.
It's unbelievable, because imagine that we had a thriving car industry. That's gone more or less now. Steel industry gone. Aluminium industry gone. Chemical industry going. You name it. And not just that, everyone's had to pay all these extra prices. And that affects restaurants. It affects every single, the only reason up to 1850, up to the Industrial Revolution, the biggest gift of the world was the Industrial Revolution, because up till then the starvation levels, poverty, etc. Poverty in the world's decreased enormously, and the reason is dead simple. The very first steam engines and things that actually powered the mills, when they brought the mills in, and you had the Luddites said, "Oh no, we can't have this. We're losing job," because one lady could do the work of 100 because of how it was powered. Yeah. In actual fact, they were wrong, because that meant that everyone could have cheap products, and so on. So productivity was what it was all about. And that productivity went through the system, and the inventions of mankind went through and created the modern wealth, the modern economies, and that reduced poverty, reduced it. And if you want to look at the nations that are highly developed, they have relatively low birth rates. The nations that are underdeveloped have high birth rates because so many people die. Now, less people die through poverty than in human history as a percentage. Yeah, less people are disturbed by extreme weather than in human history, and all the graphs. I mean, there's just such a wide subject, which is why I've got over 200 videos on it. And I obviously can't in a talk like this do more than glimpse over the top of the mountains.
No, of course.
And so on. But and it's so frustrating because I'm more than happy. I'll put a challenge out now to any professor, anyone you like, come and debate me. They don't do it. I've done it so many times now. I set up a stand outside Trinity College, Cambridge, with a big sign behind me. Net zero was unaffordable. Come and debate. No one would debate. Yeah.
And I think, part of our mission and vision at the Truth Contract is to say, how can this be true? If this is true, debate and discuss. And, we welcome anyone who disagrees with anything you've said to come along and put their point of view forward. And a bit like the story you shared earlier about the man with the telescope who in his 80s said, no, it's the most amazing thing that's happened in my career because of all the new questions it's going to pose.
Right.
He was a real scientist.
Correct.
So, we're not saying that what anybody says is true. We're trying to get to the truth. And what you've helped us do today is answer 5 questions that I had on my mind that I had been struggling with. I hope this has been very helpful to our viewers and listeners, which I'm sure it will be. I'd just like to quickly summarize in my own words, and then I'd like to finish on a question I'd like to ask you. So I think it's fairly clear to me that the way you've explained it all, that the science is never settled.
Correct.
And that phrase, David, the climate, the science is settled, is nonsense. It's never settled. The second is that actually we've come perilously close in history to having so little carbon dioxide that life on Earth was at risk.
Yes.
And actually, the more CO2 we have, even up to 20 times what we've got today, is good for life on planet Earth.
Yes. Which is why we put it into.
So CO2 is not a problem. And so John Kerry's idea that we should have absolute zero rather than is the death of all species on the Earth.
Correct.
All of the UN Secretary General's, boiling planet stuff is rubbish. We've got a lot less extreme weather than we've had over the thousands of years. I think all of the people I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that I follow, and you as well, have all proven to me that green energy is more expensive. And actually, there are hidden costs that are never factored into the price we're given, which make it even more expensive.
Yeah.
And it can never be the only thing we have because of all the problems that we're always going to need gas to be there to back up in the peaks and the troughs. And the last thing is that this whole net zero target, the COP, it's actually a stupid target. It's a really dangerous target for humanity.
Yes, but it's not really a target because we know we're burning more CO2 than ever. We know all the conferences and all the actions make no difference at all. So it's not even a target. It's a con.
But the point is, most people would, we've got this target of net zero by 2050, and here's what we want to achieve. That is actually a stupid, bad, dangerous target.
Yes, terrible.
So there's all these people flying in all around the world on their private jets to all these conferences for what is essentially a harmful outcome for humanity.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Paul, I cannot thank you enough. This has been absolutely brilliant. I know you've got millions of other assets or hundreds of videos and things. I know that we'll make sure that there's a link to your YouTube and other resources for people to go off and explore. You've been ridiculously generous with your time in helping me put this together. I'd like to you to answer this one last question, and not in a big long explanation, but we've had, this is my word, but 20, 30, 40 years maybe of brainwashing. And, we've been told one thing was true. And now what we've done today and other people are doing is saying, well, that can't be true if this is true. What do you think can be done to help people question their beliefs and say, you know, for 20, 30 years, I believed everything the government told me, or the scientists told me, or the UN told me, or the WEF told me, or whatever, that we had this big problem. How do we get people to at least be curious, to be open to the possibility that the belief they have might be wrong and even harmful?
The only way is for politicians to, right at the top, to stop the nonsense. The only way, because it's right the way through the education system. No one, for example, the BBC would never have me on. GB News has had me on, but no one, I mean, I have to do my own thing because they won't debate, they suppress it. So how can you've got a dictatorship suppressing it all, basically. You've got that. Worse than that, you've got ignorant people as well. They actually think they're right, and they don't understand science. They don't understand what we started to talk with, the principles of science. And that's why we started with that. And if they can't do that, if when you approach your MP and say, look, I can explain this, and they say, no, you're going against the consensus. End of subject. And so without that, what I would like to start with is to ban in schools any climate education going on, but to teach what science is. I was asked to appear in a school in the Isle of Man, and it was all arranged, and the debating society wanted me there against another person. Typically, no one else would appear against me, so it was going to be just me. So when that changed to that, I thought, no, I'm only going to teach what we started this with. I'm not going to give my views on climate. I wanted to teach the children how to question, how to be skeptical, what science is. I didn't want to give my views. But what happened was the government basically cancelled me, and the next day the government sent people in to brainwash them about CO2. That is what happened. And I'd love to start in schools because it's absolutely terrible. There are 6-year-old books now, books for 6-year-old that govern, all about how climate alarmism, what it is, and how scared you should be. And they're 6. It's criminal. It's brainwashing your children. So the only way is to stop it. Now, political parties are beginning to stop, beginning to, and the reason is, the reality, as we said in the last part, it isn't possible. So they've got hold of an animal now that's not possible. In doing that, it's collapsing. So all the way around, I mean, Trump's going to help a lot, but all the way around the world, it's beginning to collapse everywhere. So it's going to collapse anyway. And it's that practical collapse, because it's not possible, that's going to force this, unfortunately. Because we're not going to have the leaders unless different parties get in. We're not going to have the leaders to do it. It's as simple as that.
I like your answer, and that's a big part of what the Truth Contract is planning to do, which is to have the conversations with interested, curious people, because our research is that ordinary people won't have anything like the level of understanding that they'll have after watching this already, but they are questioning. As you said earlier on, they're seeing the electricity bill go up every month.
They're becoming cynical. They're becoming cynical about it.
And this was going to be 9 times cheaper and £300 off our bill. It's like, well, hang on a minute. That's what they said there, but every month the cost goes up. And I think there is a little bit, maybe it's on GB News, but not on the BBC, where this is being challenged and questioned. And
only a little bit. Only a
little bit. No, I agree with you. But I do think even that little bit, from some deep social media listening that we've done, more and more people are going, I'm not sure if this is right. They haven't got the information. So what we've done today is answer 5 big questions, which hopefully there's probably another 55 we could have asked.
Yeah, we could.
Perhaps I could ask you at some time over the next few months if we can get you back for a part 2.
Yeah.
When we get feedback from this one, what we're going to be asking our members and audience to do is tell us what questions Paul should have been asked, as well as this, that you'd like him to answer, because I know you'd be up for that.
I'd love that. I love questions. When I give talks, I give a subject, like I'll deal with 10-minute subject, and then I'll ask for questions immediately. because it's live and it keeps everyone awake as well. But you can't, on this subject, a technical subject like this, you have to deal with it there and then and move on, and build. But when I present an alarmist in front of me, which I've done, and the Alameda had what the equivalent of a House of Lords member, if you like, in front of me, and he'd been trained by Al Gore School in America, and no matter when I present him with the IPCC, he just can't accept it. It's as if it's like the old idea of brainwashing soldiers or something, and it really is quite incredible how people cannot accept it at that high level. Because once you begin to accept you're wrong, it's difficult because you've got to say, I'm wrong. Everything I believed in is wrong. Yeah. And who the hell is Paul Burgess, sort of thing, to tell me? And I'm nobody. It's not me. It's the evidence.
No, I get it.
It's the evidence, right?
Well, you've been very generous. I've loved chatting with you and working with you before today. You've been extremely generous, and I know that our viewers and listeners are going to have more questions, which we'll compose and I will come back to you in a few months' time and say, right, there's more questions, because at the end of the day, for me, this boils down to we are harming the future for our children and grandchildren.
Terribly.
And why would we inflict that on ourselves and them if we understood what we were doing? We wouldn't.
No, we wouldn't.
And so I can forgive people for doing things because they've been brainwashed for 20 years and never questioned it or never been curious about it. But it's much harder to forgive them when you say, but what you were told over there isn't true, because this is true, and have a look at that. And so we are self-inflicting a sabotage on our lives, our children and our grandchildren that is completely unnecessary.
Yes.
And that's what
harmful, hugely harmful to us.
Paul, cannot thank you enough. Thank you very much indeed, and look forward to following up with you in the next few months.
Okay, bye.